Hey friends, tonight we step into the shadows of the past to explore the Selkie's song, focusing specifically on the rhythmic crash of the Atlantic tide against the ancient black basalt cliffs of the Outer Hebrides. Before we descend into the history, take a moment for yourself. Settle into your space, find a position of absolute comfort, and take a deep, slow breath. Let the weight of the day fall away. You are safe, you are still, and you are ready to travel through time. As we begin, I invite you to share in the comments which corner of the world you are listening from and what the hour is for you right now. If this sanctuary aids your rest, please consider subscribing, but only if the content truly resonates with you. Now, let us leave the haste of the modern world behind. We begin our exhaustive exploration of the Selkie song. You are standing on the edge of the world, where the land of Scotland dissolves into the spray of the deep, cold ocean. It is the hour of dusk, that soft purple time when the sun has slipped beneath the horizon, but the stars have yet to claim their place. You are a crofter, a man of the earth and the sea, living in a small stone house that has weathered the salt and the gales for over 100 years. The wind is a constant companion here, a low hiss as it moves through the tall, coarse marram grass that clings to the dunes. You can feel the moisture in the air, a fine, invisible mist that coats your skin and makes the heavy wool of your sweater feel damp and substantial. Your boots sink slightly into the wet sand of the shore, making a soft, rhythmic sound with every step you take. The tide is coming in, each wave a long, low swell that gathers its strength before shattering against the jagged rocks. The sound is a dull, resonant roar, a vibration that you feel in the soles of your feet and the marrow of your bones. It is the heartbeat of the island, slow, steady, and indifferent to the passage of human time. You pause to look out at the grey expanse of the North Atlantic, watching the white foam of the breakers as they rush toward you, then retreat back into the depths, leaving behind a trail of bubbles and the smell of old kelp. The kelp lies in tangled, dark ribbons across the shingle, glistening in the fading light like the skins of ancient serpents that have come ashore to rest. You walk past the high water mark, where the debris of the ocean collects in long, untidy rows of sea glass, bleached driftwood, and the occasional hollow shell of a crab. Above you, the sky is a vast, unblemished canvas of indigo, where the first few stars are beginning to blink into existence, their light cold and distant. The wheeling gulls that filled the afternoon with their shrill, frantic cries have mostly gone to roost, leaving only a few solitary shadows to glide silently over the breakers. You can hear the distant, hollow echo of the water as it reaches deep into the sea caves at the base of the cliffs, a sound like a low, rhythmic drumbeat that reverberates through the stone. It is a lonely sound, but to you, it is the sound of home, the familiar music of a life lived in isolation. You turn your gaze toward the black skerries, the jagged rocks that sit just offshore, partially submerged by the rising tide. The water swirled around them in white, foaming eddies, the salt spray jumping into the air with every collision. On these rocks, the seals often gather, their sleek, dark bodies almost indistinguishable from the wet stone. You listen for their calls, those long, mournful barks that carry across the water, sounding more like human moans than animal cries. Tonight, however, the rocks are silent, save for the constant washing sound of the sea. You feel the grit of the sand beneath your fingernails and the salt on your lips, a constant reminder of the environment that sustains and challenges you. The air is growing colder now, the dampness beginning to bite through your clothing, prompting you to tighten the grip on your walking stick and think of the warmth that waits within the walls of your small stone croft. You leave the wet shingle behind and begin the slow, steady climb up the narrow path that winds its way through the dunes and up toward the higher ground of the island. The path is familiar to your feet, every stone and dip known to you through years of daily travel, and you move with the unhurried grace of a man who is in no rush to reach his destination. The grass here is shorter, grazed down by the hardy black-faced sheep that roam the hills, and it crunches softly beneath your boots. As you ascend, the view of the ocean expands, the horizon a sharp dark line that separates the indigo of the sky from the churning grey of the water. You reach the crest of the hill where your cottage stands, a small, low-slung building made of thick, unhewn granite blocks and topped with a heavy thatch of heather and straw. The stone is covered in patches of orange and white lichen, ancient organisms that grow with agonizing slowness, recording the passage of decades in their expanding circles. You pause at the door, taking one last look at the darkening world, and you notice how the light of the moon is beginning to catch the white caps of the waves out at sea. The windows of your house are crusted with salt, a thin white film that blurs the world inside, making the flickering light of the peat fire appear like a soft, orange ghost. You reach for the heavy iron latch, the metal cold and pitted from years of exposure to the salt air, and you feel the weight of the door as it swings inward on its creaking hinges. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of peat smoke, dried fish, and the faint earthy scent of the wool that hangs from the rafters to dry. It is a small space, but it is secure, a sanctuary of stone and fire that stands as a defiance against the vast, empty reaches of the Atlantic that surround your island on every side. The fire in the hearth is a low, glowing mound of orange embers, casting long, wavering shadows across the uneven floorboards and the simple wooden furniture of your kitchen. You set aside your walking stick and move to the hearth, picking up a small iron shovel to stir the peat and encourage the flames to rise. The smell of the burning earth is rich and pungent, a scent that speaks of the deep bogs and the slow work of centuries, and it brings a sense of immediate comfort to your tired limbs. You take off your heavy, damp sweater and hang it on a wooden peg near the fire, watching as the steam begins to rise from the wool in a faint, ghostly cloud. Your hands are rough and calloused, the skin etched with the fine, dark lines of coal dust and salt, and you rub them together to bring back the circulation. This is the hour of the evening when you perform the small, administrative tasks of survival, the quiet chores that keep the world in order. You move to the corner where your fishing gear is stored, picking up a length of coarse hemp twine to check for frays or weaknesses. Your fingers move with a slow, practiced rhythm, feeling the texture of the rope, the salt crystals that have dried in the fibers making it feel stiff and abrasive. You check the wooden floats, the carved pieces of cork, and the iron hooks, ensuring that everything is ready for the work of the coming day. The clock on the mantelpiece, an old brass-faced thing that was your grandfather's, ticks with a steady metallic rhythm that fills the silence of the room. It is 10 minutes past 8, the hour when the tide is nearly at its peak and the wind begins to shift toward the north. You pour yourself a small mug of water from the ceramic pitcher, the liquid cool and tasteless, and you sit in the heavy, ladder-back chair to listen to the sounds of the night outside the thick stone walls. The wind has picked up now, a low, mournful moan that whistles around the corners of the thatch and causes the salt-crusted windowpanes to rattle in their wooden frames. Outside, the world has been swallowed by the darkness, the only light coming from the moon as it passes through a gap in the clouds, illuminating the white foam of the shore far below. You sit in the silence, the flickering light of the fire reflecting in your dark eyes, and you find yourself listening for something beyond the wind and the waves. It is an instinct, a strange prickling sensation on the back of your neck that suggests the night is not as empty as it seems. You think of the stories the old men used to tell in the village, of the folk who live beneath the waves and only come to land when the moon is full and the tide is high. You shake your head at the memory, dismissing the folklore as the idle dreams of lonely people, yet you cannot deny the pull of the ocean tonight. The sound of the sea seems louder, more insistent, a booming resonance that vibrates through the very foundations of your house. You stand up, your movements slow and deliberate, and you walk to the window to peer out at the coast. The white shingle of the cove is visible in the moonlight, a pale ribbon of light against the blackness of the cliffs. There, near the water's edge, you see a group of dark shapes emerging from the surf, moving with a fluid, undulating grace that is not entirely animal. They are the seals, the great grey Atlantic seals coming ashore to rest on the sand after a day of hunting in the deep channels. You watch them as they gather in the center of the cove, their sleek bodies shining like wet silver in the moonlight, and you feel a sudden, inexplicable urge to go down to the shore and witness the mysteries of the night for yourself. You reach for your heavy wool cloak, the fabric thick and coarse against your fingers, and you drape it over your shoulders to ward off the increasing chill of the midnight hour. The iron latch of the door feels cold and solid in your hand as you press it down, the mechanism clicking with a sharp, clear sound that seems to echo in the quiet interior of the Croft. You step out into the night, and the air immediately rushes to meet you, smelling of salt spray and the sharp, clean scent of the incoming tide. The moon has risen higher now, a silver coin hanging in the vast, indigo vault of the sky, casting a long, shimmering path across the surface of the Atlantic. You begin your descent toward the cove, moving with exaggerated caution, your boots finding the soft patches of moss and avoiding the loose stones that might tumble and betray your presence. The sound of the waves grows louder with every step, a rhythmic washing noise that fills the world and drowns out the beating of your own heart. As you reach the shelter of a large, lichen-covered boulder overlooking the sand, you settle into the shadows, pulling your cloak tight around you. Below, the seals are still gathered, but their behavior has changed. They are no longer lying still on the shingle, but are moving toward the center of the beach with a strange, purposeful intent. You watch, your breath held in your chest, as the large grey shapes begin to ripple and shift in the silver light. It is a slow, methodical process, a shedding of the outer self that defies the logic of the waking world, yet you see it with your own eyes. The sleek, wet skins begin to split along the back, revealing the pale, shimmering forms beneath, as if the creatures are stepping out of the very darkness of the ocean itself. You are witness to a secret older than the stones of the island, a moment where the boundary between the wild sea and the human world becomes as thin as a veil of mist. The transformation is not a sudden, jarring magic, but a slow and graceful unfolding, a ritual that seems to require the full concentration of the beings on the shore. You watch as the heavy grey pelts are cast aside, falling onto the damp sand like discarded silken robes, leaving behind a group of men and women who stand tall and elegant in the moonlight. Their skin has the luster of pearls, reflecting the silver glow of the moon, and their hair is long and dark, clinging to their shoulders in wet, heavy coils. They move with a fluid, effortless grace that suggests a life lived in a world without the heavy pull of gravity, their feet treading lightly upon the sharp shingle, as if it were the softest moss. You notice the way they look at one another, their eyes dark and liquid, filled with an ancient, wordless understanding that transcends the need for speech. The sound of their laughter begins to rise above the wash of the tide, a clear, melodic sound that reminds you of the chiming of small bells or the trickling of a freshwater spring over smooth stones. It is a sound of pure, unadulterated joy, a celebration of the brief time they are permitted to walk upon the solid earth before the tide calls them back to the deep. You find yourself leaning forward, captivated by the ethereal beauty of the scene, your own loneliness momentarily forgotten in the presence of such vibrant, otherworldly life. The air around them seems to vibrate with a soft humming energy, a resonance that you can feel in the very air you breathe, making the night feel charged with a potent magical vitality. You remain perfectly still, a shadow among the rocks, watching as the Selkies begin to circle one another, their movements rhythmic and synchronized, as if they are following the hidden music of the stars and the turning of the cosmic clock. They begin to dance, their bare feet moving in a complex, shifting pattern across the silvered sand, leaving behind delicate prints that the incoming tide will soon wash away forever. The dance is slow and revolving, a serpentine movement that mirrors the flow of the ocean currents and the swaying of the kelp forests beneath the waves. Their laughter mingles with the constant rhythmic slapping of the water against the shore, creating a soundscape that is both haunting and beautiful. A symphony of the natural and the supernatural. You can see the fine spray of the ocean catching the moonlight as they move, turning the air into a shimmering haze of diamonds and mist. They seem to pay no heed to the cold, the salt spray, or the sharp wind that hisses through the cliffs. For them, this is a moment of absolute freedom, a respite from the heavy pressure of the deep sea. You observe the administrative details of their arrival, noting how they have carefully placed their discarded skins in a neat row along the high water mark, just beyond the reach of the lapping foam. The skins look like piles of wet, dark velvet, heavy with the weight of the water and the essence of the creatures they once contained. You are struck by a sudden, intense curiosity, a desire to know the texture and the smell of those magical pelts, to hold a piece of the ocean in your own hands. The clock of the night is turning toward the hour of midnight, and the moon is at its zenith, casting shadows that are short and dark against the white shingle. You realize that you are standing at a crossroads of your life, watching a world that you have only ever heard of in the whispers of the elderly, and the weight of the moment begins to settle upon your shoulders like the heavy stones of your cottage. You crouch lower behind the jagged outcropping of granite, your hands gripping the rough, cold surface of the stone until your knuckles turn white in the moonlight. The silence of your own breath seems loud in your ears, a rhythmic huffing that you try to stifle lest the dancers on the sand sense your presence. You are filled with a strange, conflicting mixture of awe and a primal hunter's instinct, a urge to possess a part of this magic that has manifested on your lonely shore. Your eyes are fixed on the row of skins, specifically one that lies slightly apart from the others, its surface shimmering with a particularly deep, iridescent sheen. It looks soft and pliable, yet you know it must be as tough as the hull of a boat to survive the crushing depths of the Atlantic. You begin to plan your movement with the careful tactical precision of a man who has lived by his wits and the strength of his hands for 40 years. You must wait for the moment when the dance carries them further down the beach, toward the dark mouth of the sea cave, where the echoes are loudest and the shadows are deepest. The wind shifts again, bringing with it the intense briny scent of the seals and the sweet, wordless humming of the women as they move in their silver circle. You check the position of the moon once more. It is beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon, and you know that the time for the Selkies to return to the water is drawing near. Every muscle in your body is tense, ready to spring into action at the first sign of opportunity, your heart pounding a frantic rhythm against your ribs. You are no longer just a crofter watching the sea. You are a participant in a drama that has played out on these islands since the first stones were laid. A story of longing, theft, and the enduring power of the tides. The moment arrives when the dancers are most distracted, their laughter reaching a crescendo as they twirl near the foaming edge of the breakers, and you slip from your hiding place with the silence of a ghost. You move across the cold, damp sand on your hands and knees, keeping your body low and blending with the dark ridges of the beach. Your fingers finally brush against the first of the skins, and the sensation is a shock to your system. It is not warm like animal fur, but cold and slick, feeling like a mixture of wet leather and heavy silk. It is surprisingly heavy, vibrating with a faint, low-frequency hum that seems to come from the very heart of the ocean, a sound that you feel through your fingertips and up your arms. You grasp the iridescent skin you had marked earlier, the texture slightly abrasive yet oily to the touch, and you pull it toward you, the sand rasping softly against the hide. The smell is overwhelming, an intense concentration of salt, old seaweed, and the clean, cold scent of the abyss, a fragrance that fills your senses and makes your head swim. You do not linger to admire your prize. You turn and scramble back toward the safety of the rocks, the skin bundled tightly against your chest. You can feel the moisture from the pelt soaking into your wool cloak, a clammy, heavy dampness that marks you as a thief of the sea. You reach the shadows of the cliffs just as the first grey light of the pre-dawn begins to smudge the eastern horizon, and you do not stop until you are back within the thick stone walls of your cottage. You move to the corner of the room, lifting a heavy stone flag from the floor near the hearth, and you tuck the cold, silver skin into the dark, dry earth beneath. You replace the stone with a dull thud, the weight of the granite sealing the secret away, and you stand in the fading firelight, your hands shaking and your breath coming in short, ragged gasps. You stand perfectly still, your heart a frantic hammer against your ribs, listening to the heavy, oppressive silence that follows the sound of the stone flag settling back into its place. The fire has dwindled to a few glowing orange eyes that peer out from the grey ash, casting just enough light to illuminate the dust motes dancing in the cold air of the kitchen. You move to the window, your fingers trembling as you rub a small circle into the salt crust on the glass, to peer out at the world you have just betrayed. The eastern sky is no longer indigo. It has turned to a bruised, watery violet, the first indication that the dawn is approaching to claim the night. Far below on the shingle, the scene of the dance has transformed into one of frantic, silent chaos as the tide begins its slow, inexorable retreat. You watch through the blurred circle as the dark shapes on the sand scramble toward their discarded skins, the silver light of the moon fading as the sun prepares to rise. One by one, the shapes slip back into the foam, the great grey seals bobbing in the surf for a moment before diving deep into the safety of the dark Atlantic channels. But there is one figure who remains, a pale, solitary ghost, standing at the edge of the receding water, her arms wrapped around her shivering frame. She moves back and forth across the high water mark, her head bowed as she searches the sharp stones and the tangled kelp for the skin that is no longer there. The administrative reality of your theft begins to weigh upon you, a heavy, cold stone in the pit of your stomach that no fire can warm. You check the clock on the mantelpiece. It is now 5 minutes past 5 in the morning, the hour of the first bird call and the final, coldest breath of the night. You realize that you cannot stay hidden forever within the safety of your stone walls, for the sun is rising, and the secrets of the night must eventually face the uncompromising light of the day. The sun begins to crest the distant, jagged peaks of the mainland, casting long, golden fingers of light across the churning surface of the sea and turning the mist into a shimmering, translucent veil. You take a deep, steadying breath, the air tasting of peat smoke and the lingering scent of the cold, wet skin hidden beneath your feet, and you reach for your heavy wool cloak once more. The latch of the door feels like ice against your palm, the metal groaning softly as you pull it open to step out into the crisp morning air of the island. The grass is white with a fine, delicate frost that crunches beneath your boots, a rhythmic, brittle sound that seems loud in the absolute stillness of the dawn. You begin the walk back down the narrow, winding path toward the cove, your eyes fixed on the solitary figure who still haunts the edge of the breakers. As you draw closer, the sensory details of her presence become clear. She is more beautiful and more fragile than she appeared in the moonlight, her skin the color of a pale pearl against the dark, wet basalt of the cliffs. Her hair is a tangled mass of wet, dark silk, clinging to her shoulders and back, and her eyes are vast, dark pools of sorrow that seem to contain the entire depth of the ocean. She does not run when she sees you approaching. She simply stands her ground, the cold foam of the Atlantic washing over her bare feet and the salt spray clinging to her eyelashes. You see the fine, rhythmic trembling of her limbs, the physical manifestation of a cold that reaches beyond the flesh and into the soul of a creature born for the deep water. You stop a few paces away, the silence between you filled by the constant, rhythmic washing of the tide and the distant, lonely cry of a herring gull wheeling high above the cliffs. You feel the weight of your cloak, the coarse, dry wool a stark contrast to the slick, wet world she has just lost, and you move to offer it to her, your movements slow and deliberate, so as not to startle the wild thing you have trapped. You drape the heavy, dark wool over her shoulders, and for a moment, She flinches, her skin reacting to the scratchy, alien texture of the land-born fabric with a visible shiver. She does not speak, for the language of her folk is the song of the whale and the bark of the seal, a wordless resonance that has no place in the sharp, dry air of the hills. You gently place your hand on her arm, the skin feeling unnaturally cold and smooth, like the surface of a polished stone found at the bottom of a deep mountain pool. You lead her away from the foam, her feet treading tentatively upon the sharp shingle and the coarse marram grass, every step a new and difficult lesson in the physics of the shore. The walk back to the cottage is slow, an administrative exercise in patience as you guide her up the steep, winding path, her breath coming in soft, rhythmic gasps that mirror the movement of the waves. You can feel the salt mist clinging to both of you, a damp, heavy shroud that blurs the edges of the world and makes the stone croft appear like a distant, grey island in a sea of white fog. When you reach the door, you pause to check the horizon one last time. The grey seals have disappeared, the skerries now empty and desolate in the cold morning light. You usher her inside, the warmth of the peat embers greeting you like a physical embrace, and you move to the hearth to build up the fire once more. You pick up the iron tongs, the metal clicking as you arrange the dry peats in a precise glowing pyramid that soon begins to crackle and hiss with new life. The room is filled with the scent of the burning earth, a warm, pungent aroma that slowly begins to drive the chill of the ocean from the air. She stands by the door, the heavy cloak wrapped tight around her, her dark eyes fixed on the flickering flames, as if they were a strange and dangerous magic she has never encountered in the cold blue depths of her home. The room is filled with the soft domestic sounds of the morning, the rhythmic ticking of the brass clock, and the gentle bubbling of the iron pot as it sits on the crane over the fire. You move to the wooden press in the corner, your hands searching through the neatly folded layers of linen and wool for clothes that might fit her slender, otherworldly frame. You find a chemise of unbleached linen, the fabric feeling stiff and honest against your calloused fingers, and a heavy skirt of dark, hand-woven wadmal that smells of the sheep and the heather. You lay them across the wooden settle, your movements quiet and respectful, and you gesture for her to come closer to the warmth of the hearth. She moves with a hesitant, undulating grace, her feet silent on the uneven floorboards as she approaches the fire, the orange light reflecting in the dark, liquid depths of her eyes. You move to the small kitchen table, an administrative necessity to provide distance and comfort, and you begin the chore of preparing a simple meal of oat porridge and fresh milk. The wooden spoon makes a soft, rhythmic scraping sound against the side of the ceramic bowl, a mundane, human noise that seems to anchor the room in the reality of the land. You set a place for her, the wooden bowl and the pewter spoon gleaming in the firelight, and you invite her to sit in the ladderback chair that has felt so empty for so many years. She watches you with a quiet, intense curiosity, her head tilted to the side as she listens to the sounds of the house, the rattle of the windows, and the hiss of the wind in the chimney. The smell of the warm oats and the sweet milk fills the small space, a scent of abundance and security that is far removed from the raw, briny diet of the sea folk. You realize that you are beginning the slow, daily maintenance of a life together, a series of small, repetitive acts that you hope will eventually bridge the vast, silent gap between the earth and the deep water. The first day of her life on land passes in a haze of salt and silence, the hours measured by the slow movement of the sun across the salt-crusted windowpanes and the steady consumption of the peat in the hearth. She sits by the window for a long time, her hands resting motionless in her lap, her gaze fixed on the distant blue line of the horizon where the sky meets the sea. You go about your chores with a quiet, determined focus, the administrative duties of the Croft providing a necessary structure to the strange new reality of your home. You fetch fresh water from the stone well, the iron handle creaking with a rhythmic metallic groan, and you carry the heavy wooden buckets back to the kitchen, the water sloshing softly with every step. You check the stores of dried fish and salted meat, noting the levels in the ceramic jars and the wooden barrels, ensuring that there is enough to sustain two souls through the coming winter gales. The sound of the ocean is always there, a constant low-frequency thrum that vibrates through the thick stone walls, a reminder of the world she has lost and the secret you have buried beneath the floor. You notice how she winces at the sound of the clock striking the hour, the sharp mechanical chime a jarring contrast to the fluid, timeless rhythm of the tides. When the evening falls and the shadows begin to lengthen across the floor, you light a single tallow candle, the flame flickering in the draught and casting a soft, yellow glow over the small room. You see her watching the flame, her expression one of profound, wordless longing, her dark eyes reflecting the light like the surface of the sea reflects the stars. You realize that while you have provided her with warmth, clothing, and food, you have also provided her with the heavy, lingering weight of human loneliness. You sit in your chair, the silence between you filled only by the crackle of the fire and the distant, mournful bellow of the sea, and you wonder if the song she hums beneath her breath is a prayer for the return of the skin or a lament for the life she can no longer reach. The lament becomes a quiet, steady rhythm as the weeks turn into months, and the first frost of the winter begins to harden the black earth of the small vegetable plot behind the cottage. You observe her as she moves through the narrow confines of the kitchen, her steps becoming more confident upon the uneven stone, though she never truly loses that fluid, swaying gait that speaks of the deep currents. It is a slow, administrative process to teach her the ways of the land, the specific rituals required to keep a house in the harsh environment of the islands. You show her how to handle the heavy wooden butter churn, the rhythmic thump slosh of the cream, turning to fat, becoming a new heartbeat for the room. Her hands, once slick with the salt water of the North Atlantic, are now often dusted with the white, fine powder of the barley flour, or stained with the dark, earthy juices of the kale you harvest from the garden. You notice how she handles the wooden utensils with a peculiar, reverent care, as if she is listening to the grain of the wood for secrets of the forest she will never visit. The morning light at 8 o'clock is thin and pale, filtering through the salt-crusted glass and illuminating the fine silver hairs that have begun to appear in her dark tresses. You spend the early hours together in a silence that is not empty, but filled with the sounds of necessary labor. The iron kettle hums upon the crane, the steam rising in a steady white column toward the soot-stained rafters. You check the seal on the window frames, applying a fresh layer of mutton fat to the cracks to keep out the biting wind that howls across the cliffs. It is a life of constant maintenance, of small repetitive acts that anchor both of you to the solid, unyielding stone of the island. The administrative duty of keeping the house warm and fed is a constant, shared endeavor that brings a strange, quiet intimacy to the long winter afternoons. By the hour of 2 in the afternoon, the sun is already beginning its low, slow descent toward the churning grey of the western horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the moorland. You sit by the hearth, the rhythmic snip-snip of the iron shears, as you trim the wicks of the tallow candles, providing a steady, mechanical counterpoint to the distant roar of the surf. She has taken to the work of the wool with a natural, instinctive grace, her fingers moving with a speed and precision that surprises you. You watch as she cards the raw, greasy fleece, the metal teeth of the wooden combs making a sharp, rhythmic skr-skr sound that fills the small space. It is a messy, necessary chore, the air thick with the smell of lanolin and the fine floating fibers of the wool. Sometimes she begins to hum a melody that is unlike anything you have heard in the village kirk or the local tavern. It is a wordless, rising and falling sound that mimics the cry of the gulls and the low, resonant moan of the wind in the sea caves. When she sings, her dark eyes seem to lose their focus, turning toward the window where the salt spray creates a blurring, white veil over the world. You do not interrupt her, for you know that this song is her only bridge to the blue deep, a way to carry the ocean within her heart while her feet are bound to the stone. The clock on the mantelpiece ticks away the minutes, marking the transition from the light of the day to the long protective shadows of the evening. You feel a quiet satisfaction in the order of the room, the neatly stacked peats, the clean hearth, and the steady rhythmic movement of the woman who has become the center of your world. Outside the thick granite walls, the weather is a shifting tapestry of mist, rain, and the occasional blinding flash of winter sun that turns the wet rocks into glistening jewels. You take her with you on the short walk to the stone dike that marks the boundary of your land, an administrative task to ensure that the winter storms have not dislodged the heavy, unmortared stones. The air is cold and sharp, smelling of ozone and the decaying kelp that the high tide has left in the crevices of the cliffs. You move with a slow, deliberate pace, your boots crunching on the frosted heather, while she follows in your wake, her dark wool skirt snapping in the wind like a sail. You show her how to check for the stability of the wall, your hands moving together over the rough, cold surfaces of the lichen-covered granite. The texture of the stone is a constant, unyielding reality, a sharp contrast to the soft, yielding world of the water she once knew. You find a place where the wind is blocked by a high ridge of rock, and you stand together for a moment, looking out at the vast, indigo expanse of the Atlantic. The waves are high today, their white crests visible for miles, a chaotic, beautiful dance of energy and light. You see her nostrils flare as she breathes in the salt air, her body leaning instinctively toward the edge of the cliff, as if she is a compass needle being pulled toward the north. You reach out and take her hand, her skin now warm from the work of the house, and you lead her back toward the safety of the Croft. The hour is 4 o'clock, and the first few stars are already beginning to peek through the purple haze of the twilight. You feel the weight of the secret you carry, the hidden skin beneath the floor, but you push the thought away, focusing instead on the solid, comforting presence of the woman at your side. The evening routine within the cottage is a series of slow, deliberate actions that prepare the sanctuary for the long, dark hours of the winter night. You move to the shelf where the oil lamps are kept, an administrative chore that requires a steady hand and a keen eye. The lamps are made of heavy, dark tin, and they smell of the rendered fish oil that you harvest from the summer catch. You show her how to fill the small reservoirs, the golden, viscous liquid flowing with a slow, thick grace that reminds her of the movement of the kelp in the deep channels. You teach her how to trim the cotton wicks, the iron scissors making a clean, sharp sound in the quiet room. When the lamps are lit, they cast a soft amber glow that reaches into the corners of the kitchen, illuminating the dried herbs hanging from the rafters and the polished wooden surfaces of the furniture. The shadows move in a slow, rhythmic dance across the walls, a silent reflection of the flickering flames in the hearth. You sit together at the small wooden table for the evening meal, the only sounds being the ticking of the clock and the occasional sharp crack of a peat ember as it splits in the heat. The administrative reality of your life, the counting of the sheep, the mending of the nets, the storage of the grain, is a constant background to your shared silence. You notice how she watches your hands as you work, her own fingers tracing the patterns of the wood grain on the tabletop. There is a growing understanding between you, a wordless connection that is built upon the shared rhythms of the day and the shared warmth of the fire. You feel the protection of the house, the thick stone walls acting as a shield against the vast, empty reaches of the night. It is 10 minutes past 7, and the world outside has been swallowed by the darkness, leaving only the sound of the waves. The transition from the late autumn to the deep, unrelenting cold of the Scottish winter is marked by the arrival of the great gales that roll in from the west. It is now the month of December, and the island is a place of dramatic, shifting beauty, where the light of the sun is a rare and precious gift. You spend more time within the walls of the Croft, the administrative focus of your life shifting to the conservation of heat and the maintenance of the interior. You spend the mornings repairing the wooden furniture, your hands moving over the smooth, oiled surfaces of the chairs and the chests. She sits by the window, her hands busy with the knitting of a heavy wool sweater, the rhythmic click-click of the bone needles providing a steady, comforting sound. The wool is a deep indigo blue, the color of the ocean at twilight, and you notice how she often pauses to stroke the soft, warm fabric as if it were a living thing. The clock on the mantelpiece strikes the hour of noon, but the light outside is so dim that it feels like the middle of the night. The windows are perpetually crusted with salt, the white film creating a blurring, dreamlike quality to the world beyond the glass. You feel a sense of profound, quiet accomplishment in the life you have built together, a small island of domesticity in the vast, wild sea. You move to the hearth to add another peat to the fire, the orange light reflecting in the salt-crusted panes. You watch her as she works, her dark hair catching the glow of the flames, and you realize that she has become an essential part of the stone and the thatch. The loneliness that once defined your life has been replaced by a deep, quiet presence, a shared history that is written in the small daily acts of survival. You listen to the bellow of the sea, the sound now a distant, harmless thing that cannot reach you within the safety of your home. The winter deepens, and the administrative ritual of managing the fuel becomes a life-sustaining cycle that dictates the rhythm of your days. You move to the peat stack behind the cottage, your hands protected by heavy wool mittens that are stiff with the cold. The stack is a precise, rectangular monument of dark, dried earth, composed of over 500 individual blocks that you cut and dried during the long days of the previous summer. You count them as you move them, an administrative necessity to ensure that the warmth will last until the first thaw of the spring. Each block of peat is light but solid, smelling of the deep moor and the ancient roots of the heather. You carry them into the kitchen in a large wicker basket, the weight of the fuel a comforting pressure against your hip. She is there to receive them, her hands already moving to clear a space by the hearth for the new supply. The sound of the wind outside is a constant, low-frequency roar, a reminder of the thousands of miles of open ocean that lie between your island and the next shore. You notice how the salt mist has frozen into delicate white patterns on the exterior of the stone walls, a crystalline architecture that sparkles in the dim light. Inside, the fire is the center of the universe, the orange glow reflecting in the dark, polished surfaces of the wooden dresser. You sit for a moment to catch your breath, the silence of the room filled by the rhythmic ticking of the brass clock and the soft, steady breathing of the woman who has become your companion. It is 8:30 in the evening, and the darkness is absolute, a heavy velvet blanket that covers the hills and the sea. You feel the security of the thick, granite walls, the stones themselves appearing to huddle closer together against the weight of the winter night. The world is reduced to this small, warm space, a sanctuary of fire and stone. The windows of the Croft are a constant focus of your maintenance, for the Atlantic gales carry a fine, persistent spray of salt that coats the glass in a thick, white crust. This film is so dense that it blurs the world outside, turning the cliffs and the ocean into a series of shifting grey shadows. You spend the morning hours with a bucket of warm water and a coarse linen cloth, the rhythmic scrubbing of the glass a meditative, administrative chore. As the salt dissolves, the light of the winter sun pours into the kitchen, illuminating the fine dust that settles upon the furniture and the silver threads of the spiderwebs in the corners. You watch as she prepares the midday meal, her movements precise and unhurried as she handles the heavy iron pots. The smell of the salted herring and the boiling potatoes fills the air, a scent of survival and simple abundance. The sound of the sea is always present, the sharp metallic rattling of the salt crystals against the panes that sounds like a handful of sand being thrown by a ghost. It is a sound that defines the season, a reminder of the power of the water that surrounds you. You check the administrative log you keep in a small leather-bound book, recording the direction of the wind and the state of the tides. It is an essential practice for a man of the island, a way to map the unpredictable moods of the ocean and the sky. You notice how she listens to the rattling of the glass, her head tilted to the side, her dark eyes following the movement of the light. There is a quiet harmony in the house, a shared acceptance of the isolation and the labor. You move to the hearth to sharpen your skinning knife on a smooth, grey whetstone, the rhythmic shrit-shrit of the metal against the stone, providing a sharp, clear counterpoint to the distant bellow of the surf. The world outside is a chaos of wind and water, but inside, everything is in its proper place. The light of March brings the first tentative promise of spring, and with it, the administrative duties of the planting season. The sun rises a few minutes earlier each day, a golden glow that touches the tops of the cliffs at 7 in the morning and lingers a little longer on the surface of the sea. You begin the work of the garden, your hands once again in the dark, cold earth, as you prepare the beds for the kale and the barley. The soil is rich and peaty, smelling of the winter rains and the slow decay of the heather. You show her how to press the seeds into the earth, your fingers moving together in the dirt, a silent collaboration of the land and the sea. The air is still cold, but it has lost the sharp, biting edge of the winter, replaced by a fresh, moist scent that speaks of growth and renewal. The gulls are louder now, their cries more frequent as they begin to build their nests in the crevices of the cliffs. You observe the administrative progress of the birds, noting their movements and their numbers as they wheel above the breakers. She seems to respond to the changing light, her humming becoming more melodic and less like a lament. She spends more time in the garden, her hands moving through the soil with a surprising tenderness, as if she is learning to love the earth that holds her. The sound of the ocean remains the backdrop of your lives, but it is now a softer, more rhythmic washing, the violent gales of the winter giving way to the steady Atlantic swell. You check the thatch of the roof, looking for any damage from the storms. The administrative necessity of keeping the house dry and secure a constant priority. You feel a sense of optimism as the green shoots of the barley begin to pierce the dark surface of the earth. The cycle of the year is turning, and with it, the life you have built together is becoming more deeply rooted in the stone and the soil of the island. The arrival of the summer months brings a thick, white mist that clings to the cliffs and the moorland, a damp shroud that blurs the boundaries of the world. This is the season of the sea mist, a humid, heavy atmosphere that tastes of salt and makes the wool of your clothing feel perpetually clammy. The administrative focus of the summer is the drying of the fish, a crucial task that ensures your survival through the next winter. You spend the long grey days on the shore, harvesting the cod and the ling from the deep, cold channels. You carry the catch back to the cottage, where you have built a series of stone flakes, flat platforms of granite, where the fish are laid out to dry in the wind. You show her how to clean and salt the fish, the rhythmic scraping of the scales and the application of the white, coarse salt, a repetitive, necessary chore. The air around the cottage is thick with the scent of the drying fish and the sharp, briny smell of the kelp. The seabirds circle overhead, their shadows passing through the mist like ghosts, waiting for a moment of distraction to claim a share of the harvest. You maintain a constant watch, an administrative duty to protect the winter stores from the hungry gulls. She works beside you in the mist, her dark hair covered in a fine veil of moisture, her hands moving with a steady, quiet efficiency. The sound of the ocean is muffled by the fog, a distant, rhythmic thumping that feels more like a memory than a reality. You check the levels of the salt in the wooden barrels, an administrative necessity to ensure that the preservation can continue. The days are long and the work is hard, but there is a profound satisfaction in the abundance of the season. You feel the weight of the summer, the heavy, humid air pressing against the stone walls of the Croft, a sanctuary of salt and labor in the white heart of the mist. As the summer fades and the first hints of autumn appear in the turning color of the heather, the cosmic clock of the island begins to signal the return to the shadows. The light of the sun becomes more golden and less intense, casting long, dramatic shadows across the cliffs and the sea at 5 in the evening. This is the season of reflection, the time when the frantic labor of the summer gives way to the quiet maintenance of the autumn. You observe the inner life of the woman as she watches the changing light, her gaze often fixed on the western horizon, where the great grey seals are beginning to gather once again on the skerries. She is silent for long periods, her hands resting motionless on her lap, her expression one of a deep, wordless longing. You feel the weight of her sadness, a silent resonance that vibrates through the house like the distant roar of the surf. The administrative duties of the season continue, the harvesting of the barley and the gathering of the potatoes, providing a necessary distraction from the heavy atmosphere of the room. You move through the chores with a quiet, determined focus, the rhythm of the work, a way to ground yourself in the reality of the land. The sound of the ocean is louder now, the first of the autumn storms beginning to stir the deep waters of the Atlantic. You check the seals on the windows and the door, the administrative preparation for the coming winter once again a priority. You notice how she stands in the doorway, her hair blowing in the wind, her nostrils flaring as she breathes in the sharp, salt air of the gathering gale. The cycle of the seasons has completed its turn, and the life you have built together has survived another year. You sit by the fire in the evening, the ticking of the clock a steady mechanical companion, and you watch the flickering flames as they reflect in her dark, liquid eyes. The story of the island is written in the stone, the salt, and the slow, rhythmic passage of time. As the passage of time continues its relentless circular march, a new rhythm enters the stone cottage, one that is not measured by the tide or the ticking clock, but by the soft, rapid beating of a small human heart. It is the middle of a particularly harsh February, and the administrative focus of the house has shifted from the maintenance of the nets to the preparation for a new life. You have spent the early hours of the morning boiling water in the heavy iron pot, the steam rising in thick, white clouds that condense upon the salt-crusted windowpanes. The room is warm, perhaps warmer than it has ever been, for you have built a fire of your finest, most compressed peats, their orange glow providing a steady, reliable heat. The arrival of the firstborn son is marked not by a cry of alarm, but by a low, melodic sound that reminds you of the soft clicking of a dolphin or the bubbling of a hidden spring. You move to the bed, your hands rough and calloused against the fine, unbleached linen sheets that you have washed and dried, over the scent of lavender and peat. You take the child into your arms, and the first thing you notice is the weight, a substantial, grounding presence that anchors you to the moment, and the stone. His skin is pale and smooth, smelling of the clean, cold air of the islands, and the faint, sweet scent of warm milk. There is a profound stillness in the room, a cessation of the wind and the waves, as if the ocean itself is pausing to witness the birth of a child who belongs to both its depths and its shores. You check the administrative logs in your mind, noting the hour as precisely 4 in the morning, the time when the moon begins its final descent into the western sea. The mother watches you from the shadows of the bed, her dark eyes filled with a new, complex mixture of exhaustion and a deep protective love that you have never seen before. It is a moment of absolute, quiet triumph for the house. The child is a creature of both the heather and the foam, and as you hold the small swaddled bundle, you notice the administrative details of a body that is not entirely land-born. His eyes are large and dark, lacking the clear white of a human gaze, appearing instead like 2 polished obsidian stones that reflect the flickering light of the hearth with a deep internal luster. When you unwrap the linen to wash him, a task you perform with a bowl of warm water and a soft woolen cloth, you discover the subtle, thin webbing between his fingers and toes. It is a delicate, translucent membrane like the skin of a grape or the silk of a spider, a physical mark of the sea that no amount of terrestrial life can erase. You rub a small amount of rendered seal oil into his skin to keep the dry air of the land from causing him discomfort, an administrative chore that you perform with a slow, rhythmic gentleness. The sound of the cradle rocking upon the uneven floorboards, thud, creak, becomes the new metronome of your existence, marking the hours between feedings and the quiet periods of rest. You notice how the child responds to the sound of the ocean. He does not startle at the boom of the surf, but instead grows still, his head turning instinctively toward the window as if he is listening for a voice that only he can hear. The mother begins to sing to him, her voice a soft, wordless hum that rises and falls with the cadence of the tide, a song that seems to soothe the child more effectively than any lullaby of the islands. You spend the long winter evenings watching them, the light of the tallow candle casting long swaying shadows across the walls. The administrative reality of your life has expanded to include the care of this otherworldly being, a responsibility that feels as heavy and as permanent as the granite blocks of your cottage. The years of early childhood are a period of constant watchful maintenance, for the attraction of the water is a powerful, instinctive force that pulls at the children like a physical weight. As soon as the boy can walk, a feat he accomplishes with a swaying, undulating grace that mirrors his mother, his feet lead him unerringly toward the shore. You spend your afternoons on the shingle, an administrative duty to ensure that the cold Atlantic does not claim him before he is ready for its power. You watch as he plays in the tide pools, his webbed fingers exploring the crevices of the basalt rocks and the slippery green ribbons of the sea lettuce. He does not fear the cold. He walks into the foaming edge of the breakers with a laugh that is as clear and as bright as the spray itself. You observe how the salt water seems to nourish him, his dark eyes glowing with a vibrant, watery energy after a day spent by the waves. The administrative chore of keeping him dry and warm is a futile endeavor, for he is always damp, his wool clothing perpetually crusted with a fine white layer of salt. You bring him back to the cottage as the sun begins to set at 5 in the evening, the air smelling of ozone and the damp earth of the moorland. You wash the sand from his feet with a bucket of fresh water, the rhythmic scrubbing of his skin a grounding, terrestrial ritual. His mother watches from the doorway, her hands resting on the frame, her gaze following the movement of the tide with a silent, heavy longing. The boy runs to her, his hands smelling of the ocean and the kelp, and she pulls him into the warmth of the Croft with a tenderness that is both beautiful and heartbreaking. You realize that the children are the bridge between your two worlds, but they are a bridge that leans heavily toward the blue deep, a constant reminder of the ocean's enduring claim. A second child arrives, a daughter with the same dark, liquid gaze and the same silent, undulating grace as her mother, reinforcing the otherworldly presence within the stone walls of the Croft. The administrative duties of the house increase with the size of the family, the maintenance of the clothing, and the preparation of the meals becoming a constant, repetitive cycle of labor. You spend your mornings at the wooden loom, the rhythmic thud-clack of the shuttle passing through the warp as you weave the heavy grey wool for their sweaters and skirts. The air in the kitchen is often thick with the smell of the sea broth you prepare for them, a rich, briny soup made from the white fish of the channels and the dulse you harvest from the rocks. They eat with a quiet, intense focus, their movements synchronized and efficient, as if they are following a hidden, aquatic protocol. You notice the administrative detail of their skin. Even in the middle of a dry summer heatwave, they feel cool and moist to the touch, like the surface of a polished pebble. The children do not speak much, for they seem to communicate through a series of subtle gestures and melodic hums that they have learned from their mother. They spend their hours together by the window, their heads tilted as they listen to the clatter of the pebbles in the waves and the distant, muffled barking of the seals. You check the stores of grain and the levels of the oil lamps, an administrative necessity to ensure that the growing family is provided for through the coming changes of the light. The house is no longer the lonely sanctuary of a single man. It is a vibrant, hybrid world where the administrative chores of the Croft are performed against a background of sea songs and the constant, salty mist of the Atlantic that drifts through the door. The household is now a small, busy colony of the shore, a hybrid world where the administrative chores of the Croft are performed against a background of sea songs and the constant, salty mist of the Atlantic. It is the 10th year since the night of the dance on the silver sand, and the administrative log of your life has become a complex tapestry of land and sea. You spend the hour of 6 in the evening checking the administrative stability of the garden walls, for for the children often climb the stones to look out at the skerries where the grey seals gather. Their presence has changed the very resonance of the cottage. The silence that once sat heavy in the corners has been replaced by the soft, wordless melodies that they hum as they work. You observe the mother as she teaches them the administrative rituals of the land, the carding of the wool, the churning of the butter, the cleaning of the hearth, but her hands often falter, her gaze wandering toward the salt-crusted windowpanes. The children mirror her longing, their dark eyes reflecting the indigo of the evening sky as the first stars begin to appear above the cliffs. The sound of the sea is louder now, a rhythmic, booming resonance that seems to vibrate through the floorboards and the very bones of the house. You sit in your ladder-back chair, the brass clock ticking with a steady, mechanical reliability, and you watch the family you have created from the theft of a skin. You feel a profound sense of security in their presence, yet you cannot ignore the administrative reality of their nature. They are the shore-born, the creatures who live in the spray and the mist, always listening for the call of the tide. The fire burns low in the hearth, casting a warm orange glow over the room as the world outside is swallowed by the darkness and the rhythmic, washing sound of the North Atlantic. The rhythmic, washing sound of the North Atlantic is the constant driving force that pulls her from the hearth and toward the edge of the world, where the land falls away into the white foam of the breakers. You observe her standing upon the highest point of the black basalt cliffs, her figure a sharp, dark silhouette against the vast, watery expanse of the western sky. The wind here is a living thing, a powerful, invisible hand that presses against her chest and tosses her long, dark hair into a tangled web of salt and silk. You notice how she leans into the gale, her body tilted at an angle that would cause any land-born creature to stumble, yet she remains as steady as the stone beneath her feet. The maram grass at the edge of the cliff hisses as the wind moves through it, a dry, rhythmic sound that mimics the breath of the ocean below. It is 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the hour when the light begins to turn to a deep, burnished gold, illuminating the fine spray that rises from the collision of the waves and the rock. You stay a respectful distance behind her, your hands occupied with the administrative task of mending a section of the dry stone wall that the winter storms have loosened. The rough, cold texture of the granite provides a grounding reality for your fingers, even as your mind wanders into the silent, unreachable spaces of her heart. You watch the way her nostrils flare as she breathes in the sharp, briny scent of the gathering tide, a fragrance of old kelp and fresh ozone that seems to sustain her more than any meal of the land. The ocean bellowed from the deep channels, a low-frequency resonance that you can feel in the vibration of the cliff edge. She is waiting, though she does not say for what, her eyes fixed on the distant skerries where the grey seals are beginning to hoist their heavy bodies onto the wet stone to rest. The seals on the distant skerries appear like small, dark droplets of ink upon the white foam, their barks carrying across the water as a series of long, mournful echoes that drift upon the wind. You pause in your work, the heavy iron crowbar resting against your thigh, and you listen to the administrative conversation of the sea folk as they gather for the night. The sound is a blend of animal grunts and something that sounds remarkably like a human lament, a hollow, resonant calling that seems to vibrate within the very chambers of your own chest. She does not move, her gaze locked upon the rocks with an intensity that makes the world of the Croft feel small and insignificant. You notice how her hands are gripped tightly at her sides, the skin of her knuckles pale and smooth like the surface of a polished shell. The administrative duty of checking the black-faced sheep that roam the cliffside is a necessary distraction. Their soft, rhythmic bleating and the occasional crunch of their teeth against the sparse grass, providing a domestic counterpoint to the wild roar of the surf. You move among the flock, your hands checking the thickness of their wool and the clarity of their eyes, ensuring that the health of the Croft is maintained even as the sea exerts its powerful pull. The sun is now a low red orb hanging just above the horizon, casting a long, shimmering path of copper light across the surface of the Atlantic. You see her shadow stretching out toward the edge, a long, dark finger that touches the very spray of the waves. There is a profound inner life to her stillness, a quiet decision-making process that she undergoes every day at this hour, weighing the warmth of the fire against the cold liberty of the deep. You feel the weight of the secret buried beneath the kitchen floor, a cold, heavy presence in your mind that matches the temperature of the stone you are handling. By the hour of 5 in the afternoon, the shadows of the cliffs have stretched so long that they begin to swallow the narrow, winding path that leads back toward the stone cottage. The air is growing colder, the dampness of the evening mist beginning to settle upon your wool clothing in a fine, translucent veil of moisture. You move toward her, your boots making a slow, rhythmic scrunch upon the short, salted grass, a sound that signals your presence without the need for words. She turns her head slightly, and you see the salt mist clinging to her eyelashes and the tip of her nose, her dark eyes appearing even more liquid and vast in the deepening twilight. The administrative reality of the evening chores, the lighting of the lamps, the feeding of the fire, the preparation of the bread, calls both of you back from the precipice. You reach out and gently touch her arm, the fabric of her sleeve damp and cool to the touch, and you feel the rhythmic, steady pulse of her heart through the layers of wool. She follows you back toward the croft with a slow, swaying gait, her steps synchronized with the retreating movement of the tide. You notice how she looks back one last time at the skerries, where the shadows of the seals are now indistinguishable from the wet basalt. The wind has shifted toward the north, a sharp, biting breeze that carries the scent of snow and the distant metallic smell of the ice fields far beyond the horizon. You reach the door of the cottage, the iron latch feeling solid and honest in your hand, and you usher her into the warmth of the peat smoke and the flickering orange light. The interior of the house is a sanctuary of order and maintenance, the dry, pungent smell of the burning earth providing a visceral shield against the vast, watery loneliness of the coast. You move to the hearth to arrange the peats for the evening, the mechanical clicking of the iron tongs a comforting sound in the quiet room. The children are already waiting inside, their dark heads bowed over a wooden bowl of fresh sweet milk as they sit upon the woven rug before the fire. You observe the administrative detail of their presence, the way they mirror their mother's stillness and her instinctive, quiet grace as they move through the small space. The girl is tracing the patterns of the stone floor with a webbed finger, her movements slow and rhythmic, while the boy listens to the rattling of the salt-crusted windowpanes with a look of intense, inward concentration. You move to the wooden press to fetch the flour for the morning's baking, an administrative necessity that grounds you in the cycle of the land and the seasons. The smell of the warm milk and the dry wool fills the kitchen, a domestic aroma that seems to temporarily soothe the longing that hangs heavy in the air. The clock on the mantelpiece strikes the hour of 6, the brass bell ringing with a clear, sharp tone that echoes against the thick granite walls. You notice how the mother moves to the window, rubbing a small, clear circle in the salt film to peer out at the darkness, her breath creating a faint, ghostly cloud on the glass. The sound of the ocean is louder now, a deep, mournful bellow that seems to permeate the very foundations of the house, a low-frequency vibration that you can feel in the soles of your feet. You check the oil level in the lamps, the golden, viscous liquid flowing with a slow, heavy grace as you refill the reservoirs for the long night ahead. The administrative task of maintenance is your anchor, the series of small, repetitive acts that prevent the world of the land from being swallowed by the mystery of the sea. You sit in your ladder-back chair, the wood creaking softly beneath your weight, and you watch the flickering shadows as they dance across the ceiling, a silent reflection of the fire that burns at the center of your life. As the purple light of the twilight begins to swallow the horizon, you lead them back toward the safety of the stone croft, the administrative transition from the wild shore to the domestic hearth completing itself. The scent of the peat smoke rises from the chimney in a steady white column, a beacon of warmth and survival in the gathering darkness of the island. You move through the final chores of the day with a quiet, determined efficiency, the maintenance of the house providing a necessary structure to the evening. You check the latch on the door and the seals on the windows, ensuring that the biting, salt-laden wind is kept at bay. The mother begins to prepare the beds, her hands moving over the heavy wool blankets with a slow, rhythmic gentleness that speaks of a deep inner life. She sings a soft, wordless melody as she works, a song that mimics the rising and falling of the tide and the distant, muffled barking of the seals on the rocks. The children fall asleep to the sound of her voice, their breathing becoming slow and synchronized with the movement of the waves far below the cliffs. You sit by the fire for a long time after they have settled, the ticking of the clock a steady, mechanical companion in the silence of the room. You feel the weight of the house, the stones themselves appearing to huddle closer together against the cold and the dark. The inner life of the Croft is a fragile, beautiful thing, a shared history that is written in the salt crust of the glass and the embers of the hearth. You look at the woman as she sits by the window, her dark eyes reflecting the flickering orange light of the fire, and you realize that she is a creature of two worlds, forever caught in the resonance between the earth and the deep water. The night is vast and empty, but within these four stone walls there is warmth, there is order, and there is a quiet, enduring love that stands as a defiance against the ocean. The arrival of the great gale is heralded not by a sound, but by a sudden heavy shift in the atmospheric pressure that you feel in the very cavities of your chest. It is 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but the world has been plunged into a premature, bruised darkness as a wall of black clouds rolls in from the western horizon. You stand outside the cottage, your hands protected by heavy leather gloves, performing the urgent, administrative task of securing the thatch against the coming hurricane. The air is strangely still, a heavy, expectant silence that is more unnerving than the loudest roar. You work with a steady, rhythmic focus, throwing the heavy hemp ropes over the roof and securing them to the large, weighted stones that sit at the base of the walls. Each stone is a solid, unyielding anchor, the rough granite biting into the palms of your hands as you tighten the knots. You check the tension of the ropes, an administrative necessity to ensure that the wind does not find a purchase beneath the heather and straw. The smell of the air has changed, becoming sharp with ozone and the metallic scent of a deep-sea disturbance. You look out at the Atlantic, and you see that the water has turned a leaden, sickly grey, the swells moving with a slow, ominous power that suggests a vast energy beneath the surface. The first few drops of rain begin to fall, large and cold, striking the stone walls with a sharp, distinct sound, like the ticking of a cosmic clock. You finish the last of the ropes, your breath coming in short, visible puffs in the cooling air, and you take one final look at the darkening coast. The birds have long since fled to the deepest crevices of the cliffs, leaving the world to the wind. You move toward the door, the iron latch feeling solid and reliable, and you step into the sanctuary of the stone. By the hour of 6 in the evening, the wind has transitioned from a sharp whistle into a sustained, terrifying roar that seems to possess a physical mass. It is a sound that does not merely fill the air, but vibrates through the very masonry of the cottage, a low-frequency resonance that you feel in your teeth and your bones. You move through the kitchen, performing the administrative ritual of battening down the hatches, checking the heavy wooden shutters that you have bolted over the windows. The iron bolts feel cold and unyielding, a mechanical defiance against the chaos outside. You can hear the salt spray striking the glass with the force of gravel, a sharp rhythmic clatter that sounds like 1,000 ghostly fingers seeking entry. The light of the single oil lamp on the table flickers and dances, the flame struggling against the minute drafts that find their way through the thick granite walls. You observe the mother and the children as they huddle together on the woven rug near the hearth, their dark eyes wide and reflecting the orange glow of the peat fire. The administrative duty of keeping them calm is a silent, ongoing effort, expressed through the steady, rhythmic movement of your hands as you add fresh peats to the fire. The smell of the room is a dense mixture of burning earth, wet wool, and the sharp, briny scent of the spray that manages to seep through the door. You notice how the Selkie woman sits with her back against the stones, her head tilted as if she is listening to the specific frequency of the gale. There is no fear in her expression, only a profound, haunting recognition, as if the storm is a voice she has known since the beginning of time. The clock on the mantelpiece continues its steady, mechanical ticking, a small, brave sound that is nearly drowned out by the bellow of the sea. Outside, the Atlantic has been whipped into a terrifying frenzy of white foam and black water. The waves crashing against the cliffs with a force that makes the island itself appear to tremble. It is the hour of 8 in the evening, and the darkness is so absolute that the world beyond the cottage walls has ceased to exist, replaced by a sensory landscape of sound and vibration. You can hear the sound of massive boulders being moved by the surf far below, a deep, rhythmic grinding that speaks of a power capable of reshaping the very geography of the coast. The administrative focus of your night is the preservation of the fire, for the wind in the chimney creates a powerful, erratic draft that threatens to either extinguish the flames or pull the embers up into the thatch. You use the iron tongs to arrange the peats into a low, dense pile, the mechanical clicking of the metal a grounding, human noise in the midst of the hurricane. The smell of the sea is everywhere now, a heavy, moist presence that coats everything in a fine, invisible layer of salt. You notice the children are watching their mother, their webbed fingers entwined as they listen to the deep, mournful bellow of the ocean. It is a sound that seems to come from the very throat of the abyss, a resonant, hollow calling that mimics the songs the woman hums in the quiet afternoons. You feel the weight of the air, the pressure of the storm pushing against the thick stone walls like a living thing. The house is a small grey island of order in a universe of chaos, a sanctuary of stone and fire that has been maintained through the labor of generations. You check the seal of the door, placing a heavy sack of sand against the base to prevent the salt water from seeping across the floorboards, an administrative task that grounds you in the immediate reality of survival. The intensity of the storm increases as the hour of 10 in the evening approaches, the gale reaching a speed that causes the heavy ropes on the roof to thrum with a high-pitched, metallic vibration. Inside the kitchen, the atmosphere is thick with the scent of the peat smoke and the unspoken emotions of the family. You observe the Selkie woman as she stands up and moves toward the door, her movements slow and undulating despite the violent shaking of the house. She places her palm against the rough, cold wood of the door, her eyes closed, her nostrils flaring, as she breathes in the scent of the Atlantic that filters through the cracks. You see the fine, rhythmic trembling of her shoulders, a resonance that matches the vibration of the stone walls. The administrative duty of the father is to provide a steadying presence, and you move to stand beside her, your hand resting gently on her shoulder. The fabric of her dress is warm, but her skin feels as cool as the mist, a reminder of her enduring connection to the cold world outside. The children have fallen into a fitful sleep, their breathing synchronized with the slow, heavy rise and fall of the swell that you can feel through the floor. You check the oil lamp, the golden liquid nearly depleted by the hours of darkness, and you perform the administrative task of refilling the reservoir with a steady, practiced hand. The smell of the fish oil is a sharp, domestic aroma that briefly cuts through the briny scent of the gale. You realize that the storm is not merely a weather event to her, but a call to return, a powerful elemental summons that vibrates through her very soul. The clock on the mantelpiece strikes the hour with a dull, muffled sound, the mechanical bell appearing to struggle against the overwhelming roar of the sea. At the stroke of midnight, the gale reaches its absolute crescendo, a moment of such profound power that the stone foundations of the cottage seem to vibrate in a sympathetic resonance with the abyss. The sound of the wind has reached a frequency that is almost beyond human hearing, a high, thin scream that tears at the thatch and rattles the salt-crusted windowpanes with a terrifying intensity. You sit in the darkness of the kitchen, the fire now a low, glowing mound of embers that provides just enough light to see the outlines of the furniture. The administrative reality of the night has been reduced to the simple act of existing within the shelter, a passive maintenance of the sanctuary. You feel the weight of the house, the millions of tons of granite and earth that stand between you and the crushing force of the North Atlantic. The smell of ozone and wet wool is heavy in the air, a scent of the threshold between the land and the water. You notice that the woman is no longer standing by the door. She has moved to the window, her dark eyes fixed on the blackness beyond the glass, as if she can see the movement of the great grey seals in the churn. The bellow of the ocean is now a constant rhythmic thumping, a sound of massive energy being expended against the unyielding basalt. You realize that the house is a miracle of engineering and labor, a defiance of the elements that has stood for over 100 years. You reach out in the dark and find her hand, the skin smooth and cold, and you hold it with a quiet, desperate strength. The storm is at its peak, the world a chaos of spray and shadow, but within these four walls, there is still warmth, there is still order, and there is still the steady rhythmic beating of human heart. The light of the morning, after the great gale, is a thin, watery grey, filtering through the clouds that still race across the sky like the tattered sails of a ghost ship. You wake at 7 in the morning, the silence of the house a jarring contrast to the violent roar that has dominated the last 48 hours. Your first administrative task is to assess the integrity of the sanctuary, and you move to the door with a sense of quiet trepidation. The iron latch is stiff, coated in a fine white layer of salt that has been driven into every crevice of the metal. You step outside, and the air is remarkably still, though it carries a heavy, moist weight that smells of deep-sea mud and shattered kelp. The ground is littered with the debris of the storm, including fragments of slate and tangled clumps of heather that have been torn from the moors. You walk around the perimeter of the cottage, your eyes searching for any sign of weakness in the thick granite walls. The stones are dark and wet, having absorbed the moisture of the hurricane, but they remain as solid as the day they were first laid. You check the heavy hemp ropes that secure the thatch, noting where the wind has frayed the fibers or shifted the weighted stones at the base. It is a relief to find that the house has held, a testament to the slow, deliberate labor of your ancestors. You notice how the salt mist has created a crystalline bridge between the rocks and the grass, a temporary architecture that will vanish with the first rain. The sound of the ocean is now a low, rhythmic thumping, the waves still high but lacking the destructive fury of the midnight hour. You feel the exhaustion in your limbs, a dull ache that is the price of the night's vigilance. You return to the kitchen to build up the fire, the administrative necessity of warmth once again your primary focus. You spend the hour of 9 in the morning on the roof of the Croft, an administrative chore that requires a steady hand and a lack of fear for the heights. The thatch is heavy with the weight of the salt water, and the smell of the wet straw is pungent and earthy, filling your lungs with every breath you take. You move with a slow, deliberate caution, your boots finding purchase on the wooden slats that you have lashed to the rafters for just such a purpose. You use a large wooden mallet to pack the straw back into place where the wind has loosened it, the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the wood against the thatch providing a steady, grounding sound. You replace the frayed sections of the hemp rope, the coarse fibers biting into your palms as you pull the knots tight against the anchor stones. The texture of the wet rope is slick and abrasive, a combination that makes the work difficult and slow. You look down from your perch and see the children playing near the stone well, their dark heads moving in a synchronized rhythm as they chase the trickles of water that run between the rocks. They seem unaffected by the storm, their energy as vibrant and inexhaustible as the tide itself. The mother is nowhere to be seen, likely occupied with the administrative duties of the interior, or perhaps she is walking the cliffs to see what the ocean has brought to the shore. You feel a sense of profound, quiet isolation as you work, the vast expanse of the Atlantic stretching out to the horizon in a series of leaden grey swells. The maintenance of the house is a solitary burden, a series of repetitive acts that ensure the survival of the family against the constant pressure of the elements. You finish the repairs as the clock on the mantelpiece strikes 11, the sound drifting through the thatch as a faint metallic resonance that marks the passage of the morning. The interior of the croft is a space of muted light and heavy silence, the atmosphere thick with the lingering scent of the peat smoke and the unspoken distance between you and the woman. You observe her as she performs the administrative task of cleaning the salt from the windowpanes, her hands moving in slow, rhythmic circles with a damp linen cloth. She does not speak, and her gaze is perpetually fixed on the world beyond the glass, her eyes reflecting the grey movement of the sea. You notice how her hands often pause in the middle of a chore, her fingers resting motionless upon the wooden frame as she listens to the distant, muffled barking of the seals. There is a profound stillness in her that you cannot reach, a quiet decision-making process that seems to have its own internal calendar. You move to the wooden dresser to check the levels of the grain and the salted meat, an administrative necessity to ensure that the stores were not compromised by the damp of the storm. The wood of the dresser is cool and smooth, the grain appearing like a series of concentric waves that mirror the turning of the years. You feel the weight of the silence in the room, a presence that is as palpable as the granite walls or the heavy wool blankets. The children are quiet too, as if they are sensing the tension that vibrates through the house, like the low-frequency thrum of a distant gale. You try to bridge the gap with a simple comment about the weather, but your voice sounds hollow and strange in the small space, the words falling away into the quiet. The clock on the mantelpiece ticks with a steady mechanical reliability, marking the hour of 1 in the afternoon, the time of the midday meal. You sit at the table, the wooden surface feeling solid and honest beneath your hands, and you wait for the rhythm of the day to restore a sense of normalcy to your life. The administrative duty of the afternoon is the logging of the weather and the tides in the small, leather-bound book that you keep on the shelf above the hearth. You sit by the fire, the iron pen making a soft, rhythmic scratching sound as you record the intensity of the gale and the direction of the wind. You write the numbers as words, noting that the temperature has dropped by 10 degrees and the pressure has remained steady for 5 hours. This ritual is your anchor, a way to impose order upon the chaotic, unpredictable movements of the natural world. You notice the woman watching you from the corner of her eye, her hands busy with the spinning of the wool, the rhythmic whir, whir, whir of the wooden wheel providing a steady, hypnotic backdrop. The smell of the raw wool is rich and greasy, filling the room with the scent of the moor and the sheep. You see her looking at the hidden stone flag near the hearth, the place where the secret of the ocean is buried beneath the floor. There is a sharp, prickling sensation on the back of your neck, a feeling of being watched by someone who knows the truth but cannot speak it. You close the book with a sharp, clear sound that echoes in the quiet room, and you move to the door to check the sky once more. The sun is a pale yellow disk hanging low in the southern sky, casting long, skeletal shadows across the hills at 3 in the afternoon. You feel the distance between you growing like a physical wall, a barrier of salt and silence that no amount of fire or stone can overcome. The maintenance of the relationship is becoming as difficult and as exhausting as the maintenance of the croft, a series of small, repetitive acts that seem to lose their meaning with every passing day. You realize that while you have kept her safe from the storm, you have also kept her from the only world she truly understands. As the sun begins to set at 4 in the afternoon, casting a bruised, purple light over the churning surface of the Atlantic, you walk down to the shore to see what the tide has left behind. The shingle is wet and glistening, the white stones appearing like a field of scattered pearls in the twilight. You move with a slow, rhythmic pace, your boots crunching on the wet sand and the shattered pieces of the kelp. The air is cold and sharp, smelling of ozone and the decaying remains of the deep sea life that the gale has tossed onto the land. You see a group of grey seals barking from the skerries, their sleek bodies dark against the white foam of the breakers. They are louder tonight, their voices carrying across the water with a resonant, mournful quality that seems to vibrate in the center of your chest. You look back at the cottage on the cliff and see the woman standing in the doorway, her figure a small dark silhouette against the orange glow of the interior. She is watching the seals, her body leaning instinctively toward the water, her hair blowing in the wind like a dark silken flag. You feel a sudden, intense wave of guilt, a cold, heavy pressure that matches the temperature of the Atlantic spray. The administrative reality of your life, the house, the children, the labor, is a beautiful thing, but it is built upon a foundation of theft and silence. You bend down to pick up a piece of sea glass, a small frosted fragment of green that has been tumbled by the waves for 40 years. It feels smooth and cool in your hand, a tangible piece of the ocean's history. You realize that the storm has not only moved the rocks and the thatch, it has moved something in the soul of the house. You walk back toward the Croft as the first stars begin to appear, the rhythmic washing of the tide, a constant reminder of the world that is waiting to reclaim its own. The stars have fully claimed the sky now, and you find yourself within the kitchen of the Croft, where the air is warm and smells of the slow-burning peat. It is a Tuesday in the month of November, and the clock on the mantelpiece indicates that the hour is precisely 4:30 in the afternoon. You are seated in your ladderback chair, occupied with the administrative task of repairing a loose wooden spindle on a smaller stool. Your hands, rough with the textures of granite and salt, move with a slow, rhythmic precision, applying a thin layer of animal glue to the joints. Across the room, your son, a boy of 10 years with dark liquid eyes and webbed fingers, is playing a game of his own making on the stone floor. He is a child of the shadows, moving with a quiet, undulating grace that always reminds you of the deep water beyond the cliffs. You watch him as he explores the corners of the room, his small hands tracing the patterns of the stone flags with an intense inward focus. The sound of the ocean is a distant, rhythmic thumping against the foundations of the house, a vibration that you have lived with for so many years that it has become part of your own heartbeat. The boy pauses near the hearth, his attention captured by a slight unevenness in the floor, where a single granite slab sits a fraction of an inch higher than its neighbors. You do not think much of it at first, for the stone is old, and the earth beneath is always shifting with the weight of the Atlantic swell. You continue your work, the mechanical scraping of the wood shavings providing a steady, comforting sound in the quiet of the evening. The boy reaches out his hand, his fingers slipping into the narrow crevice at the edge of the stone, and he begins to pull with a strength that is surprising for his age. You hear the slow, rhythmic grinding of the granite against the earth, a sound that makes the hair on your neck stand up with a sudden, sharp chill. The stone flag gives way with a final, heavy thud that echoes through the quiet kitchen, revealing a dark, dry cavity in the earth beneath the floorboards. You freeze in your chair, the wooden spindle still clutched in your calloused hand, as your son reaches into the hole to retrieve a bundle that has been hidden from the light for over a decade. He pulls it out with a slow, reverent motion, and the air in the room is immediately transformed by a scent that is both ancient and overwhelming. It is the smell of the deep ocean, a pungent, concentrated aroma of salt, old seaweed, and the clean, cold essence of the Atlantic abyss. The boy holds the bundle up to the flickering light of the peat fire, and you see the iridescent sheen of the silver skin as it catches the orange glow. It is as if he has unearthed a piece of the moon itself, a slick, shimmering fabric that appears to vibrate with a faint, low-frequency hum. The texture of the skin is oily and heavy, yet it has a suppleness that defies the dry, dusty environment of the Croft. You watch as the child runs his hand over the surface, his fingers tracing the fine, dark lines of the hide with a quiet, instinctive familiarity. The sound of the sea outside seems to rise in response to the discovery, the waves crashing against the basalt cliffs with a sudden, renewed intensity. You are struck by a profound administrative realization of the finality of this moment, as if the cosmic clock has finally struck the hour of your reckoning. The boy looks up at you, his eyes reflecting the silver light of the skin, and he asks a question with a voice that is as clear and as melodic as the chime of a small bell. You cannot speak, for your throat is tight with the weight of the secret you have carried for so many years. The smell of the salt continues to fill the room, a briny veil that blurs the boundaries between the land and the water, marking the end of the long, silent winter. The heavy wooden door of the cottage groans on its hinges as the mother enters from the twilight, her cloak damp with the mist and her hair sparkling with fine droplets of salt. She stops in her tracks as she sees the boy standing by the hearth, the silver skin draped over his small webbed hands like a silken shroud. There is a moment of absolute, crushing silence in the kitchen, a cessation of all human and mechanical sound, leaving only the rhythmic bellow of the Atlantic outside. You watch as her expression transforms, the mask of the land-born woman falling away to reveal the raw elemental longing of the sea folk. Her dark, liquid eyes are fixed on the skin with an intensity that seems to draw the light from the room, their depth containing the entire history of the deep water and the currents of the north. She does not move for what feels like an eternity, her breath coming in soft, rhythmic gasps that mirror the movement of the tide far below the cliffs. You notice the administrative detail of her presence. She is no longer the wife of a crofter, but a creature of the foam, her very posture shifting into that fluid, swaying grace that speaks of the blue deep. The smell of the old seaweed and the salt spray is thicker now, a heavy, moist cloud that wraps around the three of you, connecting the past to the present with an unyielding, watery grip. You see her nostrils flare as she breathes in the scent of her true self, a fragrance that no amount of peat smoke or heather can ever erase from her soul. The boy takes a step toward her, his movements synchronized with her own, and he offers the skin to her with a gesture of profound, silent understanding. You realize that the House of Stone has finally lost its power to hold her, for the call of the ocean has become a physical force that pulls at her heart with the strength of 1,000 gales. She reaches out to touch the skin, and as her fingers brush against the slick, cold surface, a visible tremor passes through her entire frame, a resonance of the deep that vibrates into the very foundations of the Croft. You sit in your chair, a silent administrative observer to the dissolution of the life you have spent 11 years maintaining with such careful, repetitive labor. You notice the way her hands move over the hide, her fingers searching for the specific textures and the familiar weight that she has dreamed of during the long winter nights. The administrative reality of the evening chores, the mending of the nets, the counting of the sheep, the preparation of the bread, has ceased to exist, replaced by a singular, overwhelming focus on the return to the water. The room is filled with a soft humming sound that seems to emanate from the skin itself, a melodic vibration that matches the frequency of the whale song and the resonant echo of the sea caves. You see her look at you for the first time since entering the room, her gaze filled with a mixture of sorrow, gratitude, and an uncompromising oceanic necessity. There are no words between you, for the language of the shore has no power to describe the transition that is taking place in the heart of the house. You feel the weight of the years falling away, the stone and the thatch appearing as temporary, fragile things in the face of the eternal tide. The clock on the mantelpiece strikes the hour of 5, but the sound is faint and distant, a mechanical ghost that has no place in the unfolding drama. You realize that while you have provided her with warmth and a name, she has always been a passenger on the land, waiting for the hour when the silver skin would be returned to her hands. The atmosphere in the kitchen is heavy with the scent of the salt mist, a damp, grey veil that marks the end of the story you have written in the stone and the soil. The children gather around their mother, their dark heads moving in a rhythmic, synchronized sway that mirrors the movement of the kelp in the deep channels. You watch as she kisses each of them, her tears mixing with the fine salt mist that clings to their skin, a silent, watery blessing that marks them as her own. The daughter, with her dark eyes and webbed fingers, clings to her mother's skirt, her small hands feeling the texture of the silver hide with a quiet, instinctive reverence. You notice the administrative detail of the departure. She takes nothing with her from the life of the land, leaving behind the woolen cloaks, the wooden spoons, and the warmth of the peat fire. She holds the skin against her chest, the iridescent surface shimmering in the dying light of the fire, like the reflection of the moon on a calm sea. You stand up from your chair, your movements slow and heavy with the weight of your own choice, and you move to the door to open it for her one final time. The air that rushes into the room is cold and sharp, smelling of ozone and the deep-sea disturbance that heralds the turn of the tide. You see the white foam of the Atlantic far below the cliffs, a churning, vibrant energy that calls to the soul of the house with an irresistible power. The mother turns to look at the hearth one last time, her expression one of profound, wordless peace, as if she has already begun her descent into the cold liberty of the deep. You feel the grit of the sand beneath your feet, and the salt on your lips a constant reminder of the world that is about to reclaim its own. The clock on the mantelpiece indicates that the hour is 10 minutes past 5, the exact time of the turning of the evening tide. You follow them out into the darkness of the night, your boots making a slow, rhythmic crunch upon the frosted heather as you begin the final walk toward the edge of the world. You step out into the biting chill of the November night, the door of the Croft clicking shut behind you with a sound of finality that echoes in the cold air. The wind is a low, persistent whistle through the eaves, carrying the scent of snow and the sharp metallic tang of the North Atlantic. You begin the slow, administrative descent down the narrow, winding path that leads from the cliff top to the hidden cove below. The mother leads the way, her feet moving with a sure, undulating grace that is far more natural than her walk upon the level floorboards of the kitchen. She carries the silver skin draped over her arm, the iridescent hide appearing to glow with a faint, internal light that guides your steps through the darkness. The children follow close behind her, their dark heads bowed, their small feet making a rhythmic shuffling sound upon the frosted heather and the loose gravel of the path. You watch them, your heart a heavy, cold weight in your chest, noting the administrative detail of their silence. There are no cries or pleas for her to stay, for they understand the necessity of the tide as well as she does. The moon is a thin silver sliver in the western sky, casting long distorted shadows across the black basalt rocks that guard the entrance to the shore. You feel the moisture of the sea mist clinging to your wool cloak, a damp, heavy shroud that blurs the edges of the world and makes the cliffs appear like the ghosts of ancient giants. Every few steps you pause to check the stability of the path, an instinctive, administrative habit born of years of living on the edge of the world. The sound of the waves is louder now, a rhythmic, booming resonance that fills the air and vibrates through the soles of your boots, signaling that the ocean is ready to receive its own once more. The hour is 20 minutes past 5, and the world is suspended in the pause between the land and the deep. As you reach the bottom of the cliff path, the texture of the world changes from the soft, yielding heather to the sharp, uncompromising reality of the shingle beach. Your boots make a loud, rhythmic crunching sound as you move across the field of white pebbles, a sound that seems to echo against the towering walls of the cove. The air here is thick with a heavy, salt-laden mist that tastes of the deep channels and the cold, dark kelp forests that lie just beyond the breakers. You watch the mother as she approaches the high water mark, her movements becoming even more fluid and rhythmic as she nears the source of her being. The children stop a few paces behind her, their webbed fingers entwined, their dark eyes fixed upon the white foam of the incoming tide. You observe the administrative details of the shoreline. The sea has left behind long, tangled ribbons of oarweed and the shattered shells of sea urchins, a messy, organic debris that marks the boundary of the land. The sound of the ocean is no longer a distant thrum, but a deafening, rhythmic roar that drowns out all other noise, a symphony of water and stone that has played since the beginning of time. You feel the fine spray of the Atlantic on your face, a cold, stinging sensation that wakes your senses and reminds you of the raw power of the world she is about to enter. The silver skin in her hands appears to vibrate in resonance with the waves, its surface shimmering with a vibrant, watery energy that defies the darkness of the night. You check the position of the stars through a gap in the mist. The Great Bear is turning toward the north, marking the passage of the hour and the inevitable approach of the dawn. Every stone beneath your feet is a solid, grounding presence, yet you feel as if you are standing on the edge of a dream that is slowly dissolving into the salt mist and the spray of the Atlantic. The mother stops at the very edge of the water, where the cold foam of the Atlantic rushes in to swirl around her ankles before retreating back into the indigo depths. She turns to face you and the children, the silver light of the moon reflecting in the vast liquid pools of her eyes, which are now filled with a profound and wordless peace. You watch as she kneels upon the wet shingle, an administrative gesture of humility and preparation that signals the beginning of the final transition. She pulls the children to her one last time, her hands moving over their dark hair with a slow, rhythmic gentleness that speaks of a love that transcends the boundaries of the land and the sea. You see the tears on her cheeks, bright and shimmering like the salt crystals on the windowpanes of the Croft, mixing with the spray of the ocean that already coats her skin. She whispers something to them, a melody of the deep that you cannot understand, a song of the whale and the tide that will remain in their hearts forever. You stand a few paces away, your hands gripped tightly at your sides, the administrative weight of your past choices pressing down upon you like the heavy stones of your cottage. You feel a sharp, cold pang of regret, a realization that the life you built for her was a cage of warmth and stone that could never truly satisfy the longing of a creature born for the blue deep. The sound of the sea is a constant, rhythmic bellowing that seems to encourage her, a resonant calling from the great grey seals who are waiting for her out beyond the breakers. You check the clock of the night in your mind, noting that it is now 5:30, the hour when the tide reaches its full strength and the world is reborn in the salt. You reach out your hand in a silent, hopeless gesture of farewell, but she is already looking beyond you, toward the horizon where the sky meets the water in a blur of mist and shadow. She begins the final administrative ritual of the return, shaking out the silver skin so that it catches the wind like a sail, the iridescent hide shimmering with a cold, ethereal light. You watch as she drapes the hide over her shoulders, the slick, oily texture of the skin immediately adhering to her pale flesh, as if it were a part of her own body. The transformation is a slow and graceful process, a shedding of the human form that is as methodical as the turning of the seasons or the rising of the sun. You see her limbs begin to shift and blur within the silver light, her swaying, undulating grace intensifying as the magic of the deep water takes hold of her once more. The children stand perfectly still, their dark heads bowed, their breathing synchronized with the rhythmic washing of the tide, as they witness the return of their mother to her true self. The air is thick with the scent of old seaweed and fresh ozone, a pungent, powerful aroma that fills your lungs and makes your head swim with the intensity of the moment. You hear the seals barking from the distant skerries, their voices a series of long, mournful echoes that carry across the water with a resonant, welcoming quality. They are closer now, their dark heads visible in the surf as they wait to greet the one who has been lost to the land for so many years. You notice the administrative detail of the shoreline. The water is rising higher with every wave, the cold foam reaching for the silver figure as she prepares to leave the world of the stone and the thatch forever. The sound of the ocean is a roaring, triumphant symphony that celebrates the restoration of the balance, a sound that vibrates through the very marrow of your bones. It is 20 minutes to 6 in the morning, the hour of the final shadow and the first promise of the light, and the silence of the island is absolute, save for the music of the Atlantic. With one final lingering look at the shore and the small dark figures of her children, she turns and dives into the heart of a mounting wave, her body a streak of silver light against the grey water. You watch as the foam swallows her whole, the cold Atlantic reclaiming its own with a sudden rhythmic splash that echoes against the cliffs and the basalt rocks. For a moment, There is nothing but the churning white of the breakers and the constant rhythmic roar of the tide as it continues its relentless push toward the land. Then, out beyond the first line of the surf, a great grey head emerges from the water, its dark, liquid eyes fixed upon the shore for a fleeting silver second. She is a seal once more, a creature of the deep channels and the swaying kelp forests, her movements fluid and effortless as she navigates the power of the ocean. You see another shape rising to meet her, a massive grey seal who has waited through the long years of her absence, and together they turn and dive beneath the surface. They disappear into the blue deep, leaving behind only a trail of white bubbles and the fading memory of a song that once filled the corners of your stone cottage. You stand on the wet shingle, the cold water washing over your boots, your hands feeling empty and light without the weight of the silver skin. The administrative reality of the morning begins to settle upon you. The need to return to the croft, to feed the fire, and to care for the children who are now the only bridge to the world you have lost. You look up at the cliffs and see the first pale light of the dawn smudging the eastern sky, marking the beginning of a new day and a different life. The sound of the sea is a low, rhythmic thumping, a constant, indifferent presence that will continue to echo in the silence of your house for the rest of your days. The white foam of the Atlantic continues to swirl around your heavy leather boots, the cold moisture seeping through the seams of the hide and chilling your feet to the very bone. You stand motionless upon the wet shingle, your gaze fixed on the spot where the silver streak of her dive vanished into the grey, churning belly of the sea. The children remain beside you, their small hands gripping the fabric of your wool trousers, their breathing slow and perfectly synchronized with the rhythmic washing of the tide. It is now 5 minutes past 6 in the morning, and the world is beginning to reveal itself in the pale blue light of the pre-dawn hour. The black basalt cliffs rise up behind you like the walls of a cathedral, their surfaces glistening with the salt mist and the moisture of the retreating night. You notice the administrative detail of the beach. The silver skin has left a faint, shimmering trail in the sand, a path of light that is slowly being erased by the rising water. The smell of the ocean is overwhelming here, a thick, briny fragrance of old kelp, wet stone, and the deep, metallic scent of the abyss. You reach down to touch the head of your daughter, her hair damp with the spray and smelling of the salt, and you feel the rhythmic, steady pulse of her heart through her thin linen chemise. There are no words to describe the hollow sensation in your chest, a space that was once filled by the presence of the woman and is now occupied only by the distant, mournful bellow of the seals. You observe the movement of the gulls as they begin to wake, their white forms gliding silently over the breakers like ghosts searching for a lost memory. The administrative reality of your life has shifted in an instant, from the shared labor of the croft to the solitary maintenance of a family that is half bound to the waves. You turn away from the water, your boots making a slow, heavy crunch upon the white pebbles as you prepare for the climb. The walk back up the narrow, winding path toward the top of the cliffs is a slow and arduous administrative journey. Every step, a physical reminder of the weight of the years and the gravity of the land. You lead the children through the tall, coarse marram grass that hisses in the morning breeze, the dry, rhythmic sound providing a sharp contrast to the wet roar of the Atlantic below. The air is growing sharper and more transparent. As the sun prepares to crest the horizon, the frost upon the heather sparkling like millions of tiny, cold diamonds. You pause at the halfway point to catch your breath, your hands resting upon the rough, lichen-covered stones of the ancient boundary wall. The texture of the granite is cold and unyielding, a terrestrial reality that anchors your mind to the work that still remains to be done. You check the administrative state of the black-faced sheep that are huddled together in the lee of the hill, their wool thick and greasy with the moisture of the night. Their soft, rhythmic bleating is a domestic sound, a comforting reminder of the mundane cycles of life that continue regardless of the tragedies of the shore. The children move behind you with a quiet, swaying grace, their dark eyes turning back to the ocean with every turn of the path, their webbed fingers tracing the outlines of the stones. You notice how the salt mist has created a fine white veil over the entire island, blurring the edges of the moorland and the sea until they appear as one continuous indigo dream. It is now 20 minutes past 6, the hour when the first golden light of the sun touches the thatched roof of your cottage. You see the stone croft standing solitary against the sky, the chimney cold and silent, the windows crusted with the salt film of the great gale. You feel the immense responsibility of the sanctuary, the need to maintain the fire, and the order for the sake of the two beings who are all you have left of the deep water. The iron latch of the door feels like a piece of frozen earth against your palm as you press it down and step into the heavy, hollow silence of the kitchen. The room is cold, the fire having dwindled to a heap of grey, lifeless ash during the hours of the long nocturnal vigil on the shore. You move to the hearth, your movements slow and mechanical, and you begin the administrative task of relighting the fire to drive the chill from the stone walls. You use the iron shovel to clear the ash, the rhythmic scraping sound echoing in the quiet space, before arranging the dry, compressed peats in a precise pyramid. The smell of the first few wisps of smoke is pungent and earthy, a scent of the land that slowly begins to reclaim the room from the briny odor of the salt mist. You watch as the children sit upon the wooden settle, their hands folded in their laps, their gaze fixed on the hidden space beneath the floorboards, where the secret was kept for 11 years. The administrative order of the house is still there, the wooden bowls, the pewter spoons, the brass clock on the mantelpiece, but the soul of the room has retreated into the deep water. You move to the wooden press to fetch the linen for their beds, the fabric smelling of the dry heather, and the soap you made from the fat of the summer sheep. You tuck them in with a slow, rhythmic gentleness, their breathing becoming synchronized and deep as they succumb to the exhaustion of the night. It is now 7 o'clock in the morning, the hour when the world of the land fully awakens to the light of the sun. You sit in your ladder-backed chair, the wood creaking softly beneath your weight, and you watch the flickering orange flames as they begin to consume the peat. The salt on the window panes creates a soft, blurring filter for the morning light, turning the world into a dream of silver and shadow. You realize that you are the guardian of a memory, the keeper of a flame that burns in defiance of the ocean. The passage of the following months and years is marked by a steady, quiet, administrative maintenance of the life you have built upon the cliffs. You continue to mend the nets, to count the sheep, and to log the direction of the wind and the height of the tides in your leather-bound book. The children grow with a rapid, undulating grace, their dark eyes and webbed fingers becoming a legendary part of the island's history, though they remain as silent as the stones of the cottage. You observe how they spend their afternoons on the high rocks, their heads tilted as they listen to the distant, mournful barking of the seals on the skerries. There is a profound, shared understanding between you, a wordless acceptance of the fact that they are only passengers on the land, waiting for their own hour of the turning tide. The administrative chores of the croft provide a necessary structure to your days, the repetitive rhythms of the labor acting as a shield against the heavy weight of the loneliness. You spend the long winter evenings by the fire, the ticking of the brass clock a steady, mechanical companion in the silence of the room. You have never replaced the stone flag near the hearth, leaving the dark cavity in the earth as a monument to the mystery that once lived within your walls. The salt on the window panes is a permanent feature now, a white crystalline crust that you no longer attempt to wash away, for it is the only way to see the world as she saw it. It is now the hour of sunset on a day in your 65th year, the light of the sun a deep burnished copper that touches the surface of the Atlantic with a final golden kiss. You feel the slowing of your own heart, the rhythmic pulse of your life aligning with the slow, geological cooling of the island. The sound of the sea is a constant, rhythmic thumping, a low-frequency resonance that has become the background of your existence. You are ready for the stillness. The final hour of the chronicle has arrived, and the world is reduced to the rhythmic washing of the tide and the steady, quiet breathing of the sleeper in the dark. You are lying in the small stone croft, The weight of the wool blankets a comforting pressure against your chest, the smell of the dying peat fire, a soft, earthy perfume in the air. The sounds of the island, the hiss of the wind through the marram grass, the distant cry of a solitary gull, and the rattling of the salt-crusted windowpanes, all blend into a single harmonious chord of sleep. You have performed the final administrative tasks of the day. The door is latched, the lamp is extinguished, and the clock on the mantelpiece has been wound for the last time. You feel the immense, unyielding solidity of the granite walls that surround you, a fortress of stone that has weathered the storms of a lifetime to provide you with this moment of absolute peace. The ocean bellowed from the deep channels, a resonant, hollow calling that no longer feels like a lament, but like a welcome to the long, dark night. You imagine yourself as a piece of sea glass, tumbled and smoothed by the movements of the Atlantic until all the sharp edges of your grief and your labor have been worn away. You are sinking through the layers of the silence, down past the memory of the silver skin, down past the sound of the children's laughter, down into the bedrock of the world. The administrative reality of your life has been surrendered to the tide, leaving only the pure, rhythmic essence of the breath and the heart. The light of the stars is a cold, distant silver that touches the salt on the glass, creating a galaxy of light within the room that guides you into the dream. You are safe, you are still, and you are ready for the eternal silence of the shore. The story is finished, the words are fading, and the ocean is the only voice that remains. Sleep now, sleep in the salt and the stone. Sleep well.